In other global news, Turkey has carried out airstrikes targeting Kurdish militants in neighboring Iraq and Syria. And this comes a day after an attack on a Turkish military base in Iraq killed 9 Turkish soldiers. Turkey often launches strikes against targets in Syria and Iraq, which it believes to be affiliated with the Kurdistan Workers' Party. The party is a banned Kurdish separatist group which has waged insurgency against Turkey since the 1980s. The Defense Ministry said that the aircraft struck targets in Mitina, Hakurk, Garga, Kandil in North Iraq, but did not specify areas in Syria. Turkey claims that the fighter jets destroyed bunkers, shelters and oil facilities. The aim of Turkey was to eliminate terrorist attacks against Turkish people and security forces, as well as ensure border security. The statement added that many militants were neutralized in the strikes. Earlier on Friday night, attackers attempted to infiltrate a military base in northern Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. The attack killed 5 soldiers and 4 others died later of critical injuries. The Turkish Defense Ministry said that 15 militants were also killed.
Linked to Kurdish groups in response to the deaths of 9 Turkish soldiers in an attack on a military base in Iraq. The Defense Ministry stated that the airstrikes targeted 29 locations, including caves, bunkers, shelters and oil installations associated with the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party and the People's Protection Units, a Syrian Kurdish group. The YPG, that is the People's Protection Unit, has been a key part of the US allied coalition against ISIS. Turkey, considering the PKK a terrorist organization, frequently carries out attacks on locations in Syria and Iraq associated with the group. The Defense Ministry reported that the airstrikes aimed to eliminate terrorist threats against Turkish people and security forces while securing border areas. The statement mentioned the neutralization of many armed fighters, indicating either capture or killing. The recent attack on a military base in Iraq resulted in the deaths of 9 Turkish soldiers, with 15 attackers also reported killed. The PKK has not issued an immediate comment, and Iraq has previously protested Turkey's troop presence in the region. Turkey, under Operation Plolok, since April 2022, established bases in Iraq's Duhok governorate, facing objections from the Iraqi government. Turkey's foreign minister expressed determination to fight against the PKK, and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan planned a security meeting in Istanbul following the retaliation. 3 weeks prior, PKK-affiliated fighters attempted to breach a Turkish base in northern Iraq, resulting in 6 soldiers' deaths. In response, Turkey launched attacks on PKK-associated sites. Turkey and the US have disagreements regarding the status of Syrian Kurdish groups.
Now, Turkish forces have taken a decisive action in the wake of a tragedy. In a series of targeted airstrikes, Turkish Air Force has destroyed 29 target locations in northern Iraq and Syria. The targets are reportedly associated with Turkey's outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, also known as the PKK. Now, this comes in the aftermath of a tragic event when 12 Turkish soldiers lost their lives in clashes with PKK over the past 2 days in northern Iraq. In response, the Turkish military intensified its operations, neutralizing at least 16 PKK militants on Saturday and an additional 7 earlier on Friday. The Turkish Defense Ministry announced that the airstrikes were carried out at 10 p.m. local time in northern Iraq and Syria. The targets included bases, shelters and oil facilities believed to be used by the PKK militants. However, specific regions affected have not been disclosed at this time. In response to the PKK attacks, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan took to his social media account and offered condolences to the relatives and family of the 12 soldiers in a recent post. He further talked about how Turkey will keep on eliminating terrorism and will not allow any terror organization to sustain in Iraq or in Syria. Meanwhile, Turkey's Ministry of National Defense also shared the images of the 12 Turkish soldiers reportedly killed during the attacks. The PKK is recognized as a terrorist group by Turkey, the United States and the European Union. The group emerged in 1984 when it took up arms against the Turkish state. Turkey has consistently conducted airstrikes in neighboring Iraq as part of its broader offensive against PKK militants based in the region.
Now let's talk about Turkey. Ankara is out for revenge. It has launched airstrikes on northern Iraq and Syria. The Turkish forces are targeting what they call a terrorist movement, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, also known as the PKK. This weekend's airstrikes mark another escalation in West Asia, another brewing conflict. This one too is old and complicated, but let's start with the recent provocation. Last week, Turkish troops were attacked in Iraq. 12 of them were killed.
Tonight, the terror targets in Iraq and Syria were hit with great success by our heroic pilots, and we will continue with determination from now on.
There were two separate incidents in what Turkey calls the claw operation areas. These are regions in Iraq where Ankara has sent troops. A total of 12 Turkish troops died in both clashes. And the PKK took credit for these attacks. In response, Turkey scrambled its jets. The retaliation began on Saturday night. Turkey claims to have hit 29 targets across northern Iraq and Syria, including on bases, shelters and oil facilities. What you're seeing is an oil site in northeast Syria. 2 of them were bombarded by the Turkish forces on Saturday. Ankara says it killed 30 PKK militants on Sunday, and that another 26 were neutralized today.
Unfortunately, on Friday night, 6 of our heroic friends who were doing their duty in the claw operation area became martyrs, while 7 of our heroic comrades in arms were wounded. And on Saturday, in the clash that broke out in the claw lock operation area, 6 of our heroic sons became martyrs, and 6 of our heroic comrades in arms were lightly wounded.
Turkey puts the current total at 56. But these figures are not confirmed, and the PKK says the death toll is exaggerated and that Turkey's actions are just a publicity stunt. But Turkey says, and I'm quoting, it will continue with determination, which doesn't bode well for northern Iraq and Syria and the Kurdish people. You see, the Kurds are a people without a country. They mostly live in these regions. Some groups like the PKK have been fighting a guerrilla war for decades. They want to carve out their own nation. But there are other factions as well, people who are content with some autonomy. They will be the ones bearing the brunt of this Turkish onslaught, because there are always civilian casualties in such situations. The Kurdish militant factions are based in northern Iraq and Syria. The PKK is in Iraq's Kurdistan region. Syria is home to another group, the People's Defense Units, or YPG. This is also considered a terror group by Turkey, but not by the West. Now, the Kurds in Syria helped the US in their fight against ISIS. Their forces were at the forefront of that war. So they have been spared a US terror designation. America does not call them terrorists. But that does not matter for Ankara. It has vowed to eliminate both the PKK and the Syrian Kurdish forces. which is what complicates the situation for the West. Turkey has pushed back against any aid to the Kurds. It has been holding Sweden's NATO membership hostage for months. Stockholm was forced to arrest and deport Kurdish separatists. Even if the West wants to help its old Kurdish allies in Syria, it cannot risk angering Erdogan. So instead of the West, it was actually Russia that helped the Syrian Kurds. Moscow brokered a ceasefire back in 2020 and Ankara agreed to not attack northern Syria. But the latest strikes show that Erdogan is willing to violate that truce. Will this destabilize the region further? Or is this, as the Kurds say, just a publicity stunt?
Their focus remains on containing Kurdish aspirations along the southern borders, not necessarily in fully confronting the ISIS problem.
The escalation in Turkey upped a notch with, for the first time in 4 years, the army crossing the border into Iraq to chase PKK guerrillas. This follows a string of attacks that have left at least 30 Turkish soldiers and police dead over the past couple of days. A ceasefire with the Kurdish separatists that had held for 2 years is now in tatters, fighting that coincides, by the way, with the build-up to a snap general election in Turkey.
Turkish troops honour 16 of their comrades killed by a roadside bomb on Sunday. Speaking at the funeral, Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu repeated threats to the PKK militants behind the attack.
For the unity of this nation, this homeland, anyone responsible for each and every drop of blood that is shed, we brought to account.
In the wake of this attack, Davutoglu earlier vowed to wipe out the PKK as some 40 warplanes were sent to hit Kurdish militant targets. And on Tuesday, the government announced it was sending special ground forces to seek out PKK fighters in northern Iraq, stressing it would be a short-term mission. This after 2 separate PKK attacks targeted Turkish police on Tuesday. Several were injured when a rocket-propelled grenade hit their armoured vehicle in the southeastern town of Circe. And in the eastern Aralik region, over a dozen officers were killed in an attack on their minibus. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan vowed the violence would not be left unresolved.
We did not and will not abandon the nation's future to a few terrorists.
Clashes between Kurdish separatists and government forces have escalated in recent days. The government and the PKK have been on a war footing since their 2-year-old ceasefire broke down this summer. The PKK attacks have sparked nationalist anger. The pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party said over 100 of their buildings around the country were attacked on Monday. The unrest comes as the country prepares for snap elections set for November.
Well, for more, let's cross to Washington and Blaise Mistal of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. Ankara claims that the incursion into Iraq will be short. How far, though, can this escalate?
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. I think the fear is that it is going to keep escalating at least until November, when Turkey is going to have new elections. I think the consensus view in Washington is that this war on the PKK is really an electoral ploy by President Erdogan and his AKP party to try to rile nationalists and gain votes in the election after having failed to even win a parliamentary majority for the first time in 12 years earlier in June.
How will it hamper, though, the fight against ISIS, with Turkey recently joining that coalition?
I think it's going to have a significant impact for two reasons. First of all, as President Erdogan told CNN this weekend, he considers the PKK to be a bigger threat to Turkey than ISIS, and we have seen Turkey engage the PKK with much greater ferociousness than it has engaged ISIL thus far. So much of Turkey's attention is focused on the PKK threat. But secondly, the PKK is closely affiliated with the Syrian Kurdish group, the YPG, that has been the main force fighting ISIS, the main effective force fighting ISIS on the ground in Syria. It has been working closely with U.S. and allied military to target ISIS fighters. And it's very likely that they're going to decide it's not worth continuing to ally themselves with the U.S. if the U.S. is also going to support Turkey's war against their brethren.
And any reaction out of Washington, from the Pentagon, from the State Department?
Well, in a lot of respects, Washington's hands are somewhat tied. The PKK is designated as a terrorist group by Washington. The United States is engaged in fighting terrorist groups in the Middle East. And so as long as Turkey characterizes this fight against the PKK as a counter-terrorist initiative, the United States has some reason to support that. However, we have seen statements, others suggesting that they'd really like to see the Turks focus much more of their energy on ISIL and not the PKK.
All right, many thanks for that, Blaise Mistal of the Bipartisan Center in Washington. Thank you for joining us today.
Since the advance of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, Turkey has increased military activity along its border with Syria. But that's not the only reason. Syria's Kurdish fighting force, the YPG, has been gaining territory from ISIL. And that worries the Turkish government.
The US-led coalition is giving the YPG a lot of help. 80% of the coalition bombings help the Kurds. And the YPG is a threat to all people. The Arabs, Turkmen. The Kurds are trying to create a state.
Kurds are an ethnic group with a distinct culture and language. There are roughly 30 million living in a region straddling the borders of Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and from Iran to Armenia. Turkey has had a difficult relationship with its Kurdish population, who want greater autonomy. In 1978, Abdullah Öcalan founded the Kurdistan Workers' Party, better known as the PKK, to advance the struggle. It began to employ guerrilla tactics. At least 35,000 people were killed in this conflict before a ceasefire was finally put in place 2 years ago. But it's been a strained truce. The Turkish government still considers the PKK and its offshoot in Syria, the YPG, terrorist organizations.
There is a peace process going. Kurdish deputies are asking for greater political rights, the restrictions on the language to be lifted. If Turkey wanted to become a model in the region, it needs to really practice democracy at home.
Generations of underlying distrust again resurfaced this week after a suicide attack in the town of Suruç killed dozens of Kurds. The Kurdish community says the government is not doing enough to protect them, but Turkey says ISIL and the PKK are the only ones to blame for the attack. In response, it's embarked on a two-pronged bombing operation, hitting ISIL targets in Syria and PKK in northern Iraq, which is a significant shift in its stance against ISIL in particular. But some say the strikes could further strain Turkey's relationship with the Kurds. Gerald Tan, Al Jazeera.
Turkey's heaviest assaults on Kurdish militants were aimed at 6 Kurdish Workers' Party targets in northern Iraq. Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu told Parliament the strikes were a success.
With a wave of strikes, we targeted all bases, storages, artillery storages of PKK in northern Iraq, and all targets were directly hit. The mission was accomplished.
Turkey began launching these strikes almost a week ago, targeting both the PKK in Iraq and Islamic State in northern Syria. But the assaults on the PKK have so far been much heavier than its strikes against IS, fueling suspicions that its real agenda is keeping Kurdish political and territorial ambitions in check, something the government denies.
Lawyers for two journalists from Vice News and their translator have filed an appeal a day after their clients were arrested pending trial and formally charged with having links to a terrorist organization. Vice News supervising producer Yoni Usiskin told reporters outside Diyarbakir courthouse that the journalists must be released.
We call on the Turkish authorities to release immediately our three journalists. Their continued detention is unjust and wrong, and the accusations false.
Security sources and local media said last week that Britain's Jake Hanrahan and Philip Pendlebury and their translator were detained in Diyarbakir, where they were filming clashes between security forces and Kurdish militants. Turkey is among the lowest-ranked countries in international press freedom ratings.
We turn now to Turkey, where a leading opposition political party has accused Turkey's rulers of pushing the country towards civil war ahead of November's elections. Over the past week, over 100 offices of the opposition HDP, or People's Democratic Party, have been attacked. Many were set ablaze. The office of the independent newspaper Hürriyet was also attacked in Istanbul. Meanwhile, the predominantly Kurdish city of Cizre remains under 24-hour military curfew. Residents report facing a humanitarian crisis with food and water shortages. Phone lines have also been cut to the city and the media has been blocked access. Opposition politicians who have been stopped from reaching the city have accused Turkish security forces of having a shoot-to-kill policy. Local residents say 21 civilians have died. Turkish authorities have disputed that claim, saying 30 militants had been killed in the city.
Tensions in Turkey have escalated since June, when the ruling AKP party lost its parliamentary majority in a major defeat for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The opposition HDP party won 13% of the vote, securing seats in parliament for the first time. Since the elections, hostilities between Turkish security forces and Kurdish militants have sharply escalated. Hundreds of people have been killed, including dozens of security personnel, in attacks by the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party. In July, Turkey began an air campaign against camps run by the PKK in northern Iraq. The fighting shattered a peace process launched to end a conflict that's killed more than 40,000 people since 1984. On Thursday evening, she helped organize a demonstration at Columbia University here in New York in solidarity with the Kurds in Turkey and against the Turkish government attack. GOVT co-edited the books The Kurdish Issue in Turkey, A Spatial Perspective, and Rhetorics of Insecurity, Belonging, and Violence in the Neoliberal Era. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Professor. Start off by explaining, for people who hardly even know where Turkey is, what is happening right now, how serious this is.
Well, thank you for having me, because this is very serious. We are very much concerned. That's why we actually, with colleagues at the workshop I'm in now in New York, felt the need to circulate the news and attract international attention, because it's one of the worst crises the country is going through. I believe we are going towards civil war, as you were saying. The Erdogan government, the Erdogan establishment, let's say, has hijacked legitimate elections and has refused to go by the democratic mandate. So what they did was, why did, since June 7, what happened that we ended up here? It's only been 3 months that we had since the elections that brought in the HDP, which is a party that grouped different forces together. So it's not just a Kurdish party. It represents those who groups, ethnic groups, but also social groups, the LGBT, the workers, the Alevi, the Armenians. That didn't have a voice in parliament. It actually did win 13% of the vote and had 80 deputies in parliament, which changed the whole arithmetics in parliament, which means the AKP lost its majority. And what happened is, according to the constitution, the party with the most votes should have gone on a round of negotiations with other parties to form a coalition government. What the Prime Minister of the AKP didn't do, Davutoglu didn't do, was actually take these negotiations seriously and offer real chances for the other parties to get together to form the coalition. And after 45 days, the President Erdogan, actually called for new elections. So we don't have a government, there's no stability. And in the meantime, what happened also was that the AKP called off the peace process, which was a very difficult one, which was going on for years between the Kurdish separatist militants and the government. The PKK, which is the guerrilla organization, the Kurdish guerrilla organization, also decided to sort of take up arms and began to hit army and police positions. So the armed conflict is escalating now.
Hello. Thanks for this opportunity to let us have our voice heard in other parts of the world. We need it very much, especially in these days. The 4th of September, it's under curfew, plus it's not just curfew, it's under siege. There is an iron and steel siege of tanks and military carriers and special operation teams around the city, blocking all entry and departure from the city. Any and all. And even they cut off the intercity road that passes by the city. What they are blocking, the fact that they are blocking and not letting anything be heard about what's happening in Cizre makes one understand that, I mean, you can guess that they don't want you to hear, people outside to hear about what's going on in there, what they're doing in there. Of course, there is some connections with internet at times, and there are some, I don't know, some ways of reaching us, inklings of news. One of them just said half an hour ago, there's a violent explosion took place next to us, we can't go out. There is curfew, and the penalty, normal penalty for curfew and breaking the curfew is you have to pay 100 lira fine. But here in Cizre, you get shot. You have snipers and armed carriers all around the city, but they are blocked from entering the neighborhoods, the streets, the narrow streets of the neighborhoods. They cannot go in there. They want to go in there, and people are keeping them out of there because they know once they get in, it will be a massacre. So they put snipers. Cizre is a city down, it's mountainous area around it, and the snipers are located in the minarets of the mosques. No longer we have the call to prayer from mosques in Cizre. There are snipers located in the minarets and around the hills and on tall buildings around these neighborhoods. So it's 3 out of the 4, there are 4 neighborhoods in Cizre and 130,000 people living there. And 3 out of these 4 neighborhoods have been blockaded from any access from outside. The other neighborhood is just filled with all these special operation teams all around. This is the situation. We have civilian deaths, civilians dying in Cizre. It has reached, the number now is 22, and many of them are children who are playing outside.
Ask you about the significance of Cizre. Just to place it, we're talking about southeastern Turkey, and it's located at the border of Syria, just to the northwest of the Turkish-Syrian-Iraqi tri-point, where they all come together.
That's right.
So the significance of this, why this siege is happening in Cizre, and are there attacks on HDP offices around Turkey as well?
Yes, of course. And I was going to say that before Jizre, there were several other towns that have been sieged in the same way, but like Silvan, but they stayed under siege for 3 days, whereas Jizre now is in the 8th day. The siege is in the 8th day. Well, it is situated at a very strategic point. And it is sort of on the route of the passage towards Syria and Iraq of the Kurdish population, and also of medical teams, peace workers, of those in support of Kobani, which is an independent region that the Kurds have saved from the hands of ISIS in Syria, and where they're practicing basically a more or less autonomous government. So it is in a very strategic point.
And how Turkey's anti-terror laws have been used by the Erdogan government in the present crisis, and very quickly what the Kurdish role in fighting the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, how that's played a role in how Erdogan is responding internally.
Yeah,
very quickly,
just
very
short. The anti-terror laws were more draconian than the Patriot Act that was promulgated in the U.S. I mean, so it actually basically criminalizes opposition and criminalizes critique, criminalizes demonstration. So they can be used in very bad ways. And secondly, your question concerning how was it again?
The Kurdish role in fighting the Islamic State.
The Islamic State, the Kurds are actually the Kurds that are affiliated with the PKK, and not those that are affiliated with the federal Kurdish government in Iraq, are doing a very good job, and they're the only ones who are holding out against the ISIS and Syria. They are the ones who have experience fighting Syria, and the U.S. knows that, actually. I mean, that they need these Kurds to confront
Well, we will certainly continue to follow the story.
The Kurdish city of Cizre in southeast Turkey buried their dead on Sunday, a day after the unusually long 8-day curfew was lifted. Thousands attended the mass funeral held for 19 of the more than 20 residents killed during police operations under the curfew. Among those buried were a 75-year-old man, 2 children, and a month-old baby. The curfew was imposed after clashes between Kurdish youth militants affiliated with the Kurdish PKK and state security forces. A 2-year ceasefire between the PKK and the state was broken late July after peace talks failed. The circumstances of the deaths in Cizre were yet to be independently confirmed. Officials admitted there were some civilians, but blamed the PKK for bringing the war to the middle of a city. Residents said some civilians were shot by police snipers imposing the curfew, or due to sickness, as ambulances were turned away from some neighborhoods. They say they were given little time to move before the operations, warned only 40 minutes before the curfew was imposed. Nor did they expect to be trapped in their home for 8 days without electricity or water.
There's no life left here. They destroyed our houses. They shelled us. We were devastated by hunger and thirst. Our children were terrified.
Many fled right after the curfew was lifted on Saturday. During the curfew, residents kept dead bodies in homes, privately owned cold storages, and the local mosque, unable to move them safely.
We waited by our dead for 3 days at the mosque. We couldn't take him to the hospital. The body started smelling. What we experienced was inhumane.
Officials blamed the militants, saying tens of ambulances had to be turned back because of trenches filled with explosives.
Şimdi şunu bir kez daha teyiden söylüyorum.
YouTube'u yasakladılar. Kimse okumasın diye. Ya bütün dünyanın bildiğini kendi milletinden niye saklıyorsun? Niye saklıyorsun? Ve o yurttaşlarımın
Since May 2007, more than 6,000 websites in Turkey have been blocked by the censors and the courts. Some targets are political and social, like Kurdish news agencies, but the ban on YouTube and finally last month parts of Google has got some Turks very worried.
This is about freedom of expression. It's a much bigger problem than a couple of websites being shut down. The concepts of public morality, public order, shutting down sites based on these reasons is extraordinarily dangerous. Who determines public morality? It's a totalitarian mindset.
Regulation 5651 was intended to stop access in Turkey to things like insults to the country's founding father, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And that's where the problem started, because this law allows anyone who's offended by almost anything on the internet to lodge a complaint and get a site blocked. And that unleashed a wave of censorship. The Atatürk Thought Society got the whole YouTube site banned in 2008 when it complained about videos alleging Atatürk was an alcoholic and gay. Professor Mustafa Akgül is one of a group of industry campaigners trying to get the bans lifted. In June, this High Court in Ankara rejected his case, and one filed separately by YouTube's owners, Google.
We feel hopeless, terrible. We keep fighting these bans every possible way we can, but we can't break through. For 20 years I've been working to advance the internet in Turkey, but the authorities just don't understand it.
And even the Prime Minister's declared he knows how to get around the blocks. Those blocks are about to get worse. Internet in Turkey is a business as well as a cultural and educational tool. Critics of the rolling bans say they can't understand why Turkey would shut this window on the world.
We're talking about the liberal and all-encompassing laws of the freedom of speech in Turkey. This country has an incredible stance towards freedom of speech. And by an incredible stance, I mean the same stance that the Soviet Union wish they could have had, given the time. For instance, recently, Turkish nationalists thought it would be a good idea to attack a news corporation, not once, but twice. An incredible turn of events. Yes, don't worry, there was a very valid reason for doing this. The valid reason is you insulted Erdogan, our president. No one's allowed to insult him. He is our Khilafah. Our president. Sorry, I don't know how I get those two mixed up. Khilafah, President, ISIS, Turkey. But it's okay, because the AKP party did let us know that they condemned those attacks. They also participated in the second attack on the same journalistic news corporation that they decided to condemn the attacks on.
Seçimden sonra ne çıkarsa çıksın. 1 Kasım'daki seçimden sonra ne çıkarsa çıksın. Seni başkan yaptıracağız. Seni başkan yaptıracağız. Seni başkan yaptıracağız.
On September 6th, Turkey experienced one of the most embarrassing incidents in the history of its press. 200 people raided Daily Hürriyet's headquarters in Istanbul, shattering the building's windows and doors. AKP Istanbul Deputy Abdurrahim Boynukalın led the attack.
Cumhurbaşkanımız 400 tane vekil olsaydı burada çok daha düzgün, çok daha güzel çalışmalar yapabilirdik. Ama maalesef yapamıyoruz dediğinde her şeyi Cumhurbaşkanı başkan olamadığından dolayı yapıyor diyorlar.
2 days after the attack, Boynukalın spoke to state-run Anadolu Agency in a threatening manner.
AK Parti Gençlik Kolları olarak da kendi içimizdeki bütün insanlarla beraber yine bu medya organlarının önünde eylem yapmaya devam edeceğiz. Buna alışmaya da başlasınlar artık.
Just 10 hours after these words, Daily Hürriyet was attacked for the second time. with the assault triggering a public outcry and prompting parliamentary questions over his role in the attacks, Boynu Cullen defended himself, claiming that he appeared in front of Hürriyet to soothe the crowd. However, Boynu Cullen is seen continuing his threats in footage that was filmed shortly after the attack.
Çok korkaktır yani. O adamlar çok korkak. Şimdi ikinci şeyde de aynı şekilde. Sedat Ergin'e baktım böyle telliyor, melliyor, bilmem ne kendilerine...
This is not the first time that there has been freedom of speech issues with the president. Captain Sensitive Titties also gets really mad when 17-year-old teenagers make a Facebook post that hurts his feelings. Yes, his feelings will be hurt so much he might send you to jail for 11 months. If that seems unreasonable, it is. He also is known notoriously to put people on house arrest if they insult him on the internet, like every other beacon of liberal values and democracy. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, they would like to remove impunity not just from the media outlets, but also from people in parliament. Yes, the Turkish president office says insulting the president is not within the freedom of expression. The president office has dismissed the growing criticism of the police raid on the Turkish magazine, of a montage picture of a smiling President Recep Tayyip Erdogan taking a selfie in front of a coffin of a soldier. This picture was photoshopped, and it was for satirical purposes. But don't worry, that did not stop Erdogan from raiding a media outlet. It's clear that Turkey has no care for freedom of speech. They constantly jail journalists. They constantly threaten journalists. They constantly harass any liberal values that they might care or pretend to care about. And nothing is being done about it. When Turkey isn't attacking its own people, it's helping out other great nations, like the Islamic State, a place where you literally can't get into without a stamp on your passport from Turkey.
המפקדים של הגרילה הקורדית דרכונים של כמה עשרות ג'יהאדיסטים שהסתננו לסוריה ועיראק כדי לחבור לדאעש. על הדרכונים של כולם מוטבעת חותמת של טורקיה, דרכה הם נכנסו. הגבול עם טורקיה מאפשר מעבר קל ונוח לג'יהאדיסטים של דאעש, והטורקים עצמם, מתברר, מהווים נתח לא מבוטל מתוך המתגייסים.
بدنا تشتغل باشنا في بنرة أجر بدري تشتغل لنا أبو عمر التركي أبو يعقوب التركي أبو مصعب الجزراوي سعودي عربستان.
Nice coincidence, considering the current leading role over there is an Islamist. Islamist in Turkey? Islamist in Islamic State? What an interesting coincidence. In any case, it's not like Turkey ever helps the Islamic State. Oh wait, it does! Last few weeks, there were attacks on the Kurdish people instead of ISIS. In fact, it was an over 60% ratio per Kurdish person being hit comparatively to an ISIS person being hit. But don't worry, they're in the war and they're on our side. Surely these are trustworthy allies that we can all have no fear whatsoever in supporting. I mean, it's not like these guys let political parties in their country be attacked and then not send any police to help them. I mean, that's such a fascist thing. Oh. Well, surely they don't threaten lawsuits to their journalists. Oh, but it's not they might threaten them with lawsuits, but at least they don't jail. Oh wait, okay, I guess they do jail the only Kurdish journalist that worked for a very well-respected news corporation. I mean, Turkey never shoots children. Never kills kills children. That's what I meant to say. They will never kill a child of a Kurd, but they'll shoot him.
Tensions are burning on the border between Turkey and Syria, where Islamic State suicide bombings targeted checkpoints of the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia. The bombings are the latest in a series of border attacks this week that have drawn Turkey to dramatically increase its role in the Syrian conflict. Overnight, Ankara's fighter jets and ground forces attacked IS targets in Syria, as well as camps in northern Iraq belonging to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, which is outlawed in Turkey. Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu says the outlawed Marxist group DHKPC is yet another target of the strikes. He says the campaign will help create a safe zone across large sections of northern Syria.
I'm saying this based on intelligence. These three terrorist organizations have made plans with their bases turned on Turkey. These operations will continue until all of their storehouses of weapons are destroyed.
But Turkey's decision to target the PKK has prompted backlash from Kurds. In Paris, hundreds rallied Saturday to condemn the mission. French Kurd Saleh Mustafa says Turkey is using IS as an excuse to bomb the Kurds. He says, I condemn the attacks against Kurds of Turkey, and at the same time Turkey is double-dealing. It is trying to convince the international community that it is fighting IS, but in reality it is targeting the Kurds in northern Iraq. The strikes against PKK targets are likely to be a major blow to the stalled Kurdish peace talks, which had aimed to end a 3-decade insurgency against Turkey.
Saçmalıyor gel. Açık dursun. Kamera açık dursun. Durun! Gidelim abi, gitmez. Gidemezsin, daha kötü adam geliyor. Kal orada, kamerayı ver. Gel, senin içine gel. Açın kapıyı. Gel. Ya telefon yok mu telefon? Telefon yok. Abi onda açık tutmuyor. Bu kadar tahrik edilmez ki halk ya. Ya bırak halk edilmez ki ya. Hayvandır. Kamerayı açık tut, hiç kapatma, tamam mı? Hiç kapatma. Uzun çektim bari. Çektin mi?